Tom, we have a couple of questions left over from the last fireside chat that we didn't get to answer. So here for TD in Sweden, two of her questions weren't answered. I have two related questions within the area of fear patterns. I will repeat them in the end, but I first want to give you an overview. When we expose fears, I think we quite easily see recurring patterns that come in different combinations and strength in people. To a great extent, I find my own and other people's fears logic, predictable, structured, and smart. I interpret this as fears are rather organized despite having high entropy. So fears having very high organization but high entropy. Another example that we use in our fear clinic is that we metaphorically divide the ego into about 10 saboteurs. We have the controller saboteur, the restless, the avoider, the judge, etc. This makes it very easy to recognize them, to talk about them, and to work on them. So here comes my first question. I wonder if you would like to elaborate on how fears can have a clear structure yet high entropy. Is it rather that they are experienced negatively and harm us that makes us label them as high entropy? A further consideration within the same subject is diagnosis, which is also a way of finding fear patterns and labeling them. Sometimes I can see a risk in that diagnoses are used too much and that people can form their identity based on them and get stuck instead of getting rid of them. I'm curious about your own view on this. From a general viewpoint, is it helpful for people to get a diagnosis, or would it be more helpful to talk about fears in a more simplified way? Something that is natural that we all have in different forms. Could it be helpful to distinguish between fear-based diagnosis and the ones that are due to brain limitations? So to sum up the questions, how can fears be high entropy and yet be so strategic and organized? And what is your view on using diagnosis in fear work?
Okay, the first question. High entropy is, when we talk about high entropy in consciousness, we label good and bad in terms of long-term entropy. So if something is good, if in the long term entropy is lowered, something is bad if in the long term entropy is raised, is higher. Okay, so when we talk about fear, then if that fear in the long term creates dysfunction, creates inhibition, creates an inability to be your best, then that's high entropy. In the long term, that whatever it is there that's part of your psyche creates more function, better, allows you to grow, allows you to be happy and secure and satisfied and makes your life positive, then we call that low entropy, whatever those things are. So it's what they do to you or for you or with you over time that is the measure of whether they're high entropy or low temperature. So we say fear is very high entropy because over time, the fear just causes you trouble, causes you pain, causes you agony, makes you miserable. It's just high entropy, and that's what it does. And the longer you have it, the more dysfunction it gives you. So that's why we call the fear a high entropy. Now, that doesn't mean that fear can't be well organized and very strategic. Entropy comes at all sorts of levels. Okay, now we talk about it generally in terms of organization, okay, because we talk about entropy that way. But let's give this idea. Let's look at 20,000 of Hitler's best SS troopers, all in a parade. They're all marching down the Grand Avenue, 20 abreast, all goose-stepping. Can you see that? You see that picture from an old film back in 1942 or 43? Guns over the shoulders, goosed up. Well, look at that. Look how structured they are. They even walk in a structured way. They all lift their foot in the same way, put it down at the same time. I mean, they're a whole lot more structured than the people just walking around randomly in the street. So say, well, look at all those soldiers there. They're very low entropy. Okay. As far as people marching together down a street, they've got a low entropy march, because if you got a whole bunch of people that close together marching and they all walk their own speed and they weren't in step with each other, they'd all be falling over top of each other. So yes, they've got a low entropy march there. But that doesn't make them a low entropy force in the world. These people went out and killed and terrorized and did horrible things. That's high entropy. The fact that they can all march down the street in a low entropy march means nothing. All right, when they're all together marching, they all together are lower entropy than they would be if they were all wandering around in the street, not marching. All right, that just lowered entropy, maybe that much. If you happen to be in that street and they were all just wandering about randomly, you'd feel like you'd need to run for cover. Everybody'd be bumping into everybody else. Oh, everybody starts walking in step, then okay, entropy has just been raised a little bit, but not by much. What does it do to the rest of your life? What's the long-term effect of the fact that you didn't get jostled in the street that day? Well, it was nice, had all those people there, and you didn't get jostled because they all marched together in a low entropy way. All right, now in your whole life, how important was that? Oh, that's probably exaggerating it. It just wasn't that important in your whole life, was it, in the long term? But in the long term, what did all those soldiers accomplish and what did they do? What kind of misery did they create? How important was that over 20 years or 50 years? Huge, huge impact on millions of people. Okay, negative impact. That's the high entropy we're talking about. So just because high entropy, things that would cause high entropy over time can be packaged in a low entropy package for a time, doesn't make them low entropy things. It makes them high entropy things in a low entropy package. The package may mean nothing whatsoever.
The low entropy is organized, it's structured, and that was a highly organized. Many of the things about it were highly organized and detailed and meticulous.
Right.
And that's a pretty good example.
Right. Parades are highly organized. A parade with lots of people involved in it has to be highly organized or it'll turn into chaos. But that doesn't mean that the actors and the people in that parade are going to create low entropy because they've been in a parade. That parade is just a little insignificant part of the part they play. So, okay, on that day when they were all parading, they lowered the entropy of that, of the world, just went, a little lower because they were all in step. But that tiny, tiny, minuscule lowering of the entropy that means almost nothing to anybody in the long term is irrelevant. The fact that the same group of people were meant to do dastardly deeds was the high entropy. So things can look low entropy. All the forces of evil can march well together and they can all line up. They can all obey orders. They can all have brilliant tacticians and plans. So how could the forces of evil have great plans and be very clever about how they do things? Well,
it's the end point.
Yeah. What does the end point of the whole thing mean in the far term? That's how you assess entropy. What's the effect? So you can say, take all those men that were marching there. What was the effect of all those men in the long term? Say the next 10 years, 20 years. What was their effect? And then if the effect of all of those people was that everybody was happier, a lot of people were helped, then you consider all those people to be low entropy. But if it was the opposite, if a lot of people were hurt and a lot of people were less happy, then that was a high entropy thing. So entropy is always the entropy of the system. It's not the entropy of the pattern they're marching in. Oh, we can talk about that. We can say the pattern is the system. Oh, that's a low entropy pattern. Within that system, it's a low entropy pattern. Yes, but who cares? That doesn't really make much difference, you see. But we're looking at the low entropy over in the long term, over time, what was caused. And we say that's the system. Those 10,000 people were a system. And at the time they're marching, they look like a pretty low entropy system. But that's a lot in there that we don't know about. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on in that system that doesn't show when they're marching. So then you look at that whole system. Okay, there's the system. 10,000 people. We'll call that the system. Now, how does that system affect the rest of the world over the next 10 years? If that's, it could be high or low entropy, so that's the way you look at it. You have to look at the system entropy. And if you just look at a simple system like a pattern, typically that has very little impact over time. It's like there's no impact or low impact. Okay. They could have all skipped instead of walked goose-legged. They could have all skipped together like little girls on an outing. And that might have been cute, but it would have been the same low entropy. They wouldn't have run into each other if they all skipped exactly in time, in the right way. They could have all skipped down the Broadway, with flowers in their teeth. That would have been a low entropy thing too, but it still doesn't make any difference. It's not a big thing. It doesn't, all right, let's take all those people skipping with flowers in their teeth. What did they do in the next 10 years? What did they amount to? How did they change the world? And, it may have been a bunch of, happy hippies skipping down the street with flowers in their teeth. Okay, what did they do? What was their impact in the world over the next 10 to 20 years? And if it's, oh, they spread happiness and light, all the rest of their lives, well, good, it have a real low entropy effect on the world. But, they rained terror and disaster wherever they went, then it was a real high entropy. But first you define the system, and then you talk about the entropy of that system. Now we define the entropy in the system of consciousness, the consciousness system and its entropy. And then we also define a system of entropy that's just humanity. Oh, we're just looking at humanity. Okay, now that's a system. Oh, the entropy of humanity is not too low. It's pretty high entropy system. That's just a system of humanity. And we look at that and we see that that has to get better. So we can talk about it in different systems. We can talk about it in just an individual. Now there's an individual and they have a certain level of entropy. And that level of entropy will play out over the next 5 or 10 years, and we can see what it was like. What was it on the average? Was this a good choice or a bad choice? Well, let's look at the results of that choice over the next few years, and we'll see how much happiness and order it created and how much disorder and unhappiness it created. So you see, that's how we judge things as being good or bad, but we can make the system kind of any size we want to talk about that system, and then we can talk about the entropy within that system.
I think that you explained that very well with a good example. And it's very interesting. I'm sure TD will appreciate that. Going to her next question, would you use a diagnosis system to uncover fears, or would you use a more simplified ways of of simply talking about it in fear work?
It depends on the person. There are some people who, if you name their fear or diagnose it, that helps them immensely because they just feel like there's something wrong inside. There's something, and they don't know what it is, and they've been struggling with it for years. And to just pinpoint it and say, well, here it is. You're afraid of being unlovable. Or here it is. You're insecure about these kinds of things. Ah, that's it. Okay, well, let me work on that. It helps them immensely to be diagnosed as to what it is. And there's other people who does just the opposite. Oh, you say, oh, well, your problem is that, you're afraid that you're not lovable. And they go, oh my God, I'm not lovable. I'm really not lovable. That's terrible. Now, what am I going to do with this fear that I'm not lovable? Now they feel trapped by it. You've named it. And now it's like, do they have what it takes to deal with it or not? If by naming it, it gives them the courage to go rip it out by the roots and deal with it. All right, I know what it is. I'm going to work on it. Or, oh no, that's what I've got. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is just what my problem is. Oh no. You see? And they don't rip it out by the roots and they don't take energy from that to do something about it. It just beats them down. Like before, there was just this malaise and they couldn't really understand it, but now they know what it is and they feel helpless to do anything about it.
How could you
Those,
test out which one to use on the person? How would you predetermine that by
well, a
whatever
couple of
means?
ways.
Okay.
One is intuition. You have to gather that intuitively. You have to look at that person. Are they the kind of person who wallows in bad news? Or are they the kind of person that jumps up and grabs the bull by the horn and wrestles it to the ground because they have to? There's different kinds of personalities. And you kind of have to make that judge that how is this person? How will they take that? How will they go about it? And if you think, well, this is the kind of person that'll grab it by the horns and wrestle it to the ground, and it turns out it's not like that, well, then you back up. You back up before the diagnosis and start over. And you can say, well, that's one of a set of fears that you have, and you come up with something else because there is more. What that tells you, there's a lot more. If it was just that one fear, most people would grab it by the horns and wrestle it to the ground. But if there's 10 more fears in there, that's when people kind of give up and don't feel like wrestling to the ground is going to help because there's just be another one and another one and another one. So then you kind of start over with something else. So first you have to understand your patient. You have to understand the person you're trying to help. Use your intuition about that. Progress it forward in the mind. If I give this person, if I diagnose and give this person that kind of information, are they going to use that profitably to get rid of it? Or are they just going to use that now as something more clear that they have to moan about? Now they're just suffering.
Perhaps you could develop over a little bit of time a set of questions that would allow you to more easily go with one or the other.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure
I've
they
always
could
just used
do that.
intuition because that's been easy for me.
And that's a
I
good
just
one.
I just look at the person and intuition tells me whether, which
Yeah,
way I should go.
I think
But it
that would
can be
work.
very helpful for some people. It's just like using past lives as a therapy. Now, somebody is afraid of snakes, and you give them a past life therapy and tell them that they were eaten by a snake in the last life, and that's why. That gives them something to hang that on. You see, that's a diagnosis. That's why you have this thing, because a great big snake ate you last time. Or you got bitten by this poisonous snake and all your skin turned black and you were in excruciating pain for 6 months before you finally died. It was a horrible experience. And that's why you're afraid of, you have a snake phobia. Well, a person can take that And all along, they've been thinking in their own mind, there's something wrong with me. I just see a picture of a snake and I start to back away. That's not reasonable. I see or a spider, let's say, I see a little tiny spider over in a corner and I scream. And it's only like 3 millimeters by 2 millimeters and was obviously a harmless little insect. But I scream and get somebody to kill it right away. That's overreacting. There's something wrong with me. I'm dysfunctional. And then they find out that, oh, I was just bitten by a spider or a snake in my last lifetime. That's why I'm like that. Oh, well, I can deal with that. That lifetime's over. This is now. So you see, sometimes the diagnosis gives somebody the space to back up from it and say, well, here's me without that. I'm not just a dysfunctional person who's afraid of things. I had this terrible thing happen to me in the last life, and that's why I'm like that. And I was thinking I was just a really dysfunctional wimp and couldn't deal with life, but it's not like that at all. I just had this past life that caused this problem. So then they can pull up their courage and they can go win the battle. They can get over their thing. So it doesn't matter whether that past life was a true past life or not a true past life. It's irrelevant. The fact that the therapist tells them that is healing and is good medicine. It's just what they need to know for them to be able to do something about it. So you have to look at your patient or the person you're working with and saying, how are they going to take this? What are they going to do with it? Because somebody could say, oh, I knew it, past life. Oh, well, obviously there's nothing I can do about it. I can't change my past life, so I'm just damned. I'll just be that way all the rest of my life. You see, nothing I can do about the past life. So you get different kinds of people, and your diagnosis can be a cure almost for some. And diagnosis can just be something to hang your misery on for others. It just depends on the individual. But you can always go back. If you make a mistake, you can always go back and start over.
Mm-hmm. And intuition's a good way to approach it. And
intuition is a good way to approach that.
They both.
And there may be some little test that you could give them to see how inclined they were to grab the bull by the horns and wrestle it to the ground, as opposed to find things to blame things on.
Absolutely.
If they're the kind of person that just likes to blame, if they can just find something to blame it on other than them, then they're okay. All right, I can blame it on a past life. Now they have no need to get over it. They're all right. They just now know that that's what it is, and they're still going to have the same problem, because finding something to blame it on gets them out of having to be responsible for it for themselves. Okay? Or it might enable them to get over it, or they may just say, past life, that's ridiculous. And they're over it. Just like that, they're no longer afraid. The fear just disappears. Just in a split second, there was fear, then there was no fear, just because it was a big aha moment.
Right.
So it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of your person and work with them. It has to be an organic therapist-client relationship, becomes a living thing itself. It's not just that I'm the therapist, you're the client, and I do what I do, and you do whatever you do. But no, it isn't. The client and the therapist form some kind of a thing between them. And that's important to do that so that you have the intuitive information.
Thank you, Tom. I hope that's going to be very helpful for TD.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.